My ex-fiance's parents deemed me financially unstable, canceling our engagement. Years later, they sat across my desk to decide their own future. The first thing I notice every morning isn't the alarm, but the silence. It's a clean, quiet stillness in my apartment, the kind you have to earn. There are no roommates arguing over bills, no frantic searches for a clean work shirt, no gnawing anxiety about the number in my checking account. There is only the calm gray light of dawn filtering through the blinds and the quiet hum of a life built brick by meticulous brick. My name is Weston Campbell. I'm 26 years old and I am the branch manager of the Northwood Financial Bank on Elm Street. My routine is a ritual: coffee black, a 30-minute run through the quiet suburban streets, a quick check of the market futures on my phone while I eat a bowl of oatmeal. By the time I'm nodding my tie in the mirror, the man looking back at me is no longer just Weston. He's Mr. Campbell. He's the guy with the corner office, the one who signs off on mortgages and business loans, the one whose opinion carries the weight of the bank's capital. He's the guy who earns $95,000 a year plus bonuses. More importantly, he's the guy with $0 and 0 cents of student loan debt to his name. That last part, that's the real victory. Paying off that $45,000 mountain of debt wasn't a marathon. It was a war of attrition fought over 3 long years. It was brown bag lunches when my colleagues went out. It was a reliable 10-year-old sedan instead of something new and flashy. It was saying no to weekend trips and expensive nights out. Every extra dollar I earned, every small bonus, every tax refund went straight to that loan. I watched the principal shrink with a grim satisfaction, each payment a small act of rebellion against the person I used to be, the broke 23-year-old bank teller with more debt than dreams. That kid is gone. I made sure of it. Walking into the bank each morning feels like stepping onto my own turf. The air smells of clean carpets and crisp currency. The hushed professional atmosphere is a world away from the chaotic customer-facing teller line where I started. My team is already here, a well-oiled machine of loan officers, tellers, and financial advisors. I greet them with a nod and a quiet good morning. They respect me, not because of my age, but because they know I came up through the ranks. They know I earned this desk. 6 months ago, I graduated from the Northwood Financial Fast Track Management Program. It was a grueling, hyper-competitive 2-year course designed to forge leaders from within. Late nights studying banking regulations, weekends spent dissecting case studies of failed businesses, endless presentations on risk management. It was designed to break you down and rebuild you into someone who could be trusted with a branch. I didn't just survive it, I thrived. The program was my escape hatch from the life that was suffocating me, and I clung to it like a life raft. When the previous manager, a kind old man named Mr. Henderson, announced his retirement, my name was the one corporate put forward. And just like that, at 26, I was handed the keys to the kingdom. My day begins with a morning huddle. We go over the previous day's numbers, set targets for the week, and address any operational issues. My voice is calm, steady. I keep the meetings short and to the point. Efficiency is everything. All right, team. I say, closing my portfolio. Let's have a productive day. Sarah, a moment, please. Sarah, my lead loan officer, stays behind. She's sharp, experienced, and has been with this branch for over a decade. She was here when I was just a teller fumbling with deposit slips. What's on the docket today, I ask, walking towards my office. Mostly standard stuff. A few mortgage refinances, a car loan for a new doctor in town, she says, following me. But there's one file you'll need to look at. It came in late yesterday. My office is clean, minimalist. A large mahogany desk, 2 leather chairs for clients, and a wide window overlooking Elm Street. The only personal touch is a small framed photo of my parents on the credenza. Everything else is business. What kind of file, I ask, settling into my chair. The leather creaks softly, a sound of authority I'm still getting used to. Small business consolidation loan, she says, her tone shifting slightly. High-risk profile, the business is leveraged to the hilt, cash flow is in the red for the last 3 quarters. Honestly, Weston, I'm not sure why they even bothered applying. I nod, steepling my fingers. This is where my job really begins. I'm the final backstop. Bank policy is crystal clear. Any small business loan over $200,000, especially one flagged as high risk, requires the branch manager's final signature for approval. It's my judgment, my name on the line. I'm the one who has to look at the cold, hard numbers and make a decision completely devoid of emotion. It's a responsibility I take with the utmost seriousness. My entire professional identity is built on being objective, on seeing people not as stories, but as balance sheets. What's the damage, I ask? They're asking for $250,000, Sarah says, placing a thick manila folder on my desk. They need it to cover outstanding debts with suppliers and avoid filing for bankruptcy. And your recommendation, a swift denial, she says without hesitation. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't even make it to your desk. But the applicant was insistent. Knew Mr. Henderson, apparently. Threw his name around a bit, assumed he was still in charge. I raise an eyebrow. That happens sometimes. People from the old guard who haven't realized there's been a change in management. I'll review it, I say. Leave it with me. Thanks, Sarah. She nods and leaves, closing the door behind her. For a while, I focus on other tasks. I approve wire transfers, respond to a dozen emails from corporate, and review the branch's performance metrics. I work with a detached focus, the hum of the bank outside my door a familiar comfort. The thick manila folder sits on the corner of my desk, a problem waiting to be solved. It's not until after lunch, during a lull in the day's rhythm, that I finally pull it towards me. I flip open the cover, my eyes scanning the top sheet for the business name and its proprietors. My brain processes the words before my heart has a chance to catch up. Applicant Harrison Artisan Furniture. Proprietors Robert Harrison, Eleanor Harrison. The air leaves my lungs in a silent rush. The professional detachment I've cultivated for years shatters like glass. Suddenly, I'm not in my office. I'm 23 years old again, standing in the immaculate, suffocatingly perfect living room of the Harrison family home. I'm wearing my best ill-fitting suit, the one I bought for a friend's wedding. And I'm listening to Robert and Eleanor Harrison explain to me with cold surgical precision why I am no longer good enough to marry their daughter Clara. They used words like prospects and financial stability. They talked about my $32,000 a year teller's salary and my $45,000 of student debt as if they were character flaws, a terminal diagnosis for my future. The memory is so sharp, so vivid, I can almost smell the lemon-scented polish Mrs. Harrison used on her antique furniture. I can feel the weight of Clara's silence as she sat beside them, unable to meet my eyes. That day, they didn't just break an engagement. They passed a verdict on my entire existence. They judged me, weighed me, and found me wanting. My hand trembles slightly as I close the folder. I push it away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stand up and walk to the window, looking down at the traffic on Elm Street. People going about their lives, completely unaware of the ghost that has just walked into mine. 3 years. 3 years of relentless work. 3 years of sacrifice and discipline, all of it a direct, furious response to the humiliation of that day. I built this life, this position, this salary to prove them wrong, to prove to myself that they were wrong. And now, by some cruel twist of fate, the very people who condemn me for my financial instability are coming to me begging for a financial lifeline. The irony is so thick it's almost suffocating. I spend the rest of the afternoon on autopilot, my mind a whirlwind. But as the day winds down and the last of my staff heads home, I find myself sitting alone in the quiet of my office. The sky outside is turning a deep purple. For a moment, I just sit there, letting the silence settle around me again. This time, it doesn't feel calm. It feels heavy. Before I lock up, I open the bottom drawer of my desk. Tucked away in the back beneath a stack of old bank statements is a small velvet-covered box. I haven't opened it in over a year. My fingers hesitate before lifting the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded cotton, is a single pressed gardenia. It was from our first anniversary dinner. Clara had worn it in her hair. It's dry and brittle now, a pale ghost of what it once was, but the memory it holds is still potent. It's a relic from a life that no longer exists, a future that was canceled. I look at it for a long moment, a monument to the boy I used to be and the man I was forced to become. This was the last piece of that old life I allowed myself to keep. A reminder. Slowly, deliberately, I close the lid. I place the box back in the drawer and push it to the very back. I lock it and stand up, the click of the lock echoing in the empty office. The past is the past. It's a closed file. Tomorrow I will review the Harrison's application, and I will do it as Mr. Campbell, the branch manager. A man who deals only in numbers, not memories. A man who makes decisions based on financial viability, the very principles they once held so dear. The next morning, I walked into the bank 15 minutes before anyone else, just like I always do. The air was cool and still smelling of industrial-grade cleaner and fresh coffee brewing in the break room. This was my sanctuary, a world of clean lines, predictable routines, and measurable outcomes. In here, everything made sense. A balance sheet either balanced or it didn't. A credit score was either acceptable or it wasn't. There was no room for ambiguity, no space for the messy, unpredictable chaos of emotion. This job was the fortress I had built around myself, brick by meticulous brick. My routine was muscle memory. I unlocked my office, set my briefcase down, and powered on my computer. The screen came to life, illuminating rows of emails and calendar appointments. 8:30 a.m. morning huddle with the tellers. 10:00 a.m. review commercial account overdrafts. 11:30 a.m. conference call with corporate about Q4 lending targets. It was a day like any other, a perfectly constructed sequence of professional obligations. I had spent 3 years chasing this kind of boring, this kind of stability. To me, it was the ultimate luxury. The morning huddle went smoothly. I talked about our weekly goals, reminded everyone about the new compliance protocols, and shared a piece of positive client feedback. I was in my element, calm, authoritative, in control. My team respected me, not because I was a prodigy, but because I was consistent. They knew I had come up through the ranks, that I understood their jobs because I had done their jobs. The Northwood Financial Fast Track Management Program had given me the knowledge, but the teller line had given me the perspective. Back in my office, I started on the overdraft report. It was methodical work, cross-referencing accounts, assessing risk, and making decisions. A $5,000 extension for a long-standing hardware store approved. A recurring overdraft from a new restaurant with declining deposits flagged for follow-up. It was a simple, logical flow, cause and effect, action and consequence. Around 10:45, there was a soft knock on my door. "Come in," I said, not looking up from my screen. It was Mark, one of our junior loan officers. He's young, barely 24, and reminds me a little too much of myself at that age, eager, a little nervous, but smart. He was holding a thick blue folder. "Morning, Mr. Campbell," he said, hovering by the door. "Sorry to interrupt. I've got that high-risk application ready for your final review. The one I mentioned yesterday." I swiveled in my chair, gesturing for him to come in. "The business consolidation loan, bring it over." He walked to my desk and placed the folder in front of me. "It's for $250,000, he said, his voice lowering slightly, the way people do when they're talking about a lot of money. "The initial assessment is not great. I've flagged all the areas of concern, but policy is policy. A loan of this size needs your signature one way or the other." "Understood," I said, pulling the folder closer. "What's the short version, Mark?" He took a half step back, shifting into his professional recital mode. "The applicants are looking to consolidate outstanding debts to multiple suppliers and a high-interest line of credit. Their business has seen a significant downturn over the last 18 months. Cash flow has been negative for 3 consecutive quarters. Their primary assets are tied up in specialized equipment with low resale value, and their inventory turnover is dangerously slow." He took a breath. "Honestly, Mr. Campbell, under normal circumstances, this is a textbook denial. The algorithm kicked it back almost instantly. The default risk is just too high. And yet it's on my desk," I stated, my fingers resting on the cover of the folder. Mark nodded a little sheepishly. "The applicant was very insistent on a manual review by the branch manager. He said he has a long-standing relationship with this branch. That wasn't unusual. People who knew the old manager, a kind man who retired about 6 months before I took over, sometimes thought they could still rely on a handshake and a good story. But the bank had changed. The lending criteria were stricter now, driven by data, not by relationships." "All right, Mark. Thanks for the breakdown. I'll review it and make the final call by end of day." "Thank you, sir," he said, and with a quick nod, he retreated from my office, closing the door softly behind him. I just looked at the blue folder sitting in the middle of my otherwise pristine desk. It felt like a foreign object, a disruption to the perfect order of my morning. Just another file, just another problem to solve. I took a sip of my now lukewarm coffee, opened the folder, and my world stopped. My eyes scanned past the loan amount, past the risk assessment scores, and landed on the applicant information. Business name Harrison Artisan Furniture, proprietors Robert Harrison, Eleanor Harrison. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. The professional detachment I've cultivated for years shattered like glass. Suddenly, I'm not in my office. I'm 23 years old again, standing in the immaculate, suffocatingly perfect living room of the Harrison family home. I'm wearing my best ill-fitting suit, the one I bought for a friend's wedding. And I'm listening to Robert and Eleanor Harrison explain to me with cold surgical precision why I was no longer good enough to marry their daughter Clara. They used words like prospects and financial stability. They talked about my $32,000 a year teller salary and my $45,000 of student debt as if they were character flaws, a terminal diagnosis for my future. The memory is so sharp, so vivid, I can almost smell the lemon-scented polish Mrs. Harrison used on her antique furniture. I can feel the weight of Clara's silence as she sat beside them, unable to meet my eyes. That day, they didn't just break an engagement. They passed a verdict on my entire existence. They judged me, weighed me, and found me wanting. My hand trembled slightly as I closed the folder. I pushed it away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the traffic on Elm Street. People going about their lives completely unaware of the ghost that had just walked into mine. 3 years. 3 years of relentless work, sacrifice, and discipline, all of it a direct, furious response to the humiliation of that day. I joined the Northwood Financial Fast Track Management Program, not just for a career, but as an act of defiance. I studied for certifications while my friends were out at bars. I took on extra projects, volunteered for every new initiative, and paid off my entire $45,000 student loan in under 2 years through sheer brute force austerity. I built this life, this position, this $95,000 salary to prove them wrong, to prove to myself that they were wrong. And now, by some cruel twist of fate, the very people who condemned me for my financial instability are coming to me begging for a financial lifeline. Their business, their legacy, the very thing that made them feel so superior is crumbling. And I, Weston Campbell, the boy with no prospects, am the one person who holds the power to save it or let it burn. I spent the rest of the afternoon on autopilot, my mind a whirlwind. My conference call was a blur of voices and charts that I couldn't focus on. I ate my lunch at my desk, a sandwich that tasted like cardboard, my eyes constantly drifting back to that blue folder. It sat there like an unexploded bomb, representing everything I ran from and everything I ran towards. As the day wound down and the last of my staff headed home, I found myself sitting alone in the quiet of my office. The sky outside was turning a deep purple. This time the silence didn't feel calm. It felt heavy, charged with the weight of the past. Before I locked up, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Tucked away in the back beneath a stack of old bank statements was a small velvet-covered box. I hadn't opened it in over a year. My fingers hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded cotton, was a single pressed gardenia. It was from our first anniversary dinner. Clara had worn it in her hair. It's dry and brittle now, a pale ghost of what it once was, but the memory it holds is still potent. It's a relic from a life that no longer exists, a future that was canceled, a future that was deemed financially insolvent by her parents. I looked at it for a long moment, a monument to the boy I used to be and the man I was forced to become. This was the last piece of that old life I allowed myself to keep, a reminder of what they took, the pain that fueled the engine of my ambition. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the lid. I placed the box back in the drawer and pushed it to the very back. I locked it and stood up, the click of the lock echoing in the empty office. The past is the past. It's a closed file. Tomorrow I will review the Harrison's application, and I will do it as Mr. Campbell, the branch manager, a man who deals only in numbers, not memories. A man who makes decisions based on financial viability, the very principles they once held so dear, the very standards they used to discard me. Now it's my turn to apply them. The next morning I arrived at the bank an hour before anyone else. The pre-dawn light was just beginning to filter through the large plate glass windows of my office, casting long shadows across the room. I made coffee, the familiar ritual, a small anchor in a sea of emotional turbulence. Then I sat down at my desk, pulled out the Harrison's application, and opened it. This time I wasn't just looking at the names. I was looking at the numbers. For the next 2 hours, I was no longer Weston Campbell, the jilted ex-fiancé. I was Mr. Campbell, branch manager of Northwood Financial. I dissected their financial statements with the cold precision of a surgeon. I ran their debt-to-income ratio, analyzed their cash flow statements from the last 5 years, and cross-referenced their assets against their liabilities. The story the numbers told was bleak. It was a slow, agonizing death spiral. Their revenue had been steadily declining for 3 years. They had taken out high-interest short-term loans to cover payroll, leveraging their inventory, their equipment, even their personal home. They were robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Peter was about to break their kneecaps. The $250,000 loan they were asking for wasn't a life raft. It was a bucket to bail out a sinking battleship. It would plug a few holes, but the hull was fundamentally rotten. Approving this loan wouldn't just be a bad business decision, it would be professional malpractice. It was an unacceptable credit risk, and any competent manager would see it in less than 10 minutes. As I stared at a particularly grim quarterly earnings report, the memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't in my office anymore. I was 3 years in the past 23 years old, sitting in the Harrisons' immaculate, suffocatingly formal living room. The air was thick with the scent of lemon polish and disappointment. Clara was upstairs crying. Her parents, Robert and Eleanor, sat across from me on a stiff, artisan-crafted sofa, their faces carved from granite. Robert, a man who always looked like he was smelling something unpleasant, leaned forward. "Weston," he began, his voice devoid of warmth. "We need to be frank. This engagement, it's not viable." Eleanor, clutching a pearl necklace, nodded in sad theatrical agreement. "It's about stability, dear. Clara is used to a certain standard of living. A future. You're a bank teller. $32,000 a year, with $45,000 in student debt. We've seen your numbers, Weston. We had to be sure." I remember the chill that went down my spine. They'd run a credit check on me, on their daughter's fiancé. Robert continued, his tone that of a man explaining a simple, unchangeable fact of nature like gravity. "It's not personal. It's a financial decision. You're a high-risk investment. Your potential for returns is limited. We simply cannot approve this union. It would be irresponsible." They used business terms to dismantle my life. They talked about my heart as if it were a speculative stock. They looked at my love for their daughter and saw a negative balance sheet. That day, they didn't just end an engagement. They liquidated my future. A sharp buzz from my desk phone snapped me back to the present. It was my assistant, Maria, Mr. Campbell. "Mr. Robert Harrison is online too. He's quite insistent on speaking with the manager for an update on his loan." I took a deep breath, the cold fury from the memory solidifying into icy resolve. "Put him through, Maria." A click, and then that same arrogant, impatient voice filled my ear. "Hello, yes, I'm calling about the Harrison Artisan Furniture application. I submitted it yesterday and I expect an answer." I knew the previous manager, Rick, for years. We played golf. He always handled my accounts personally and promptly. "I need this sorted out today." He didn't even ask for my name. He just assumed demanded. He was still the same man, convinced the world revolved around his needs, that his connections were currency. I kept my voice level, professional, and detached. "Mr. Harrison, this is the branch manager. Your application is currently under review as a standard procedure for a loan of this size. All applications are assessed according to the bank's official criteria." There was a pause. He was clearly irritated by my impersonal tone. "Look, just tell me when I can expect the approval. We're on a tight schedule here." "Bank policy requires a final meeting to go over the details of the review," I said calmly. "My assistant will schedule a time for you and Mrs. Harrison to come in tomorrow." Fine, he huffed. "Just have the paperwork ready to sign." He hung up without another word. I leaned back in my chair, a strange calm washing over me. The internal conflict was gone. He had just handed me the script. He expected a rubber stamp from an old friend. He expected his status to bypass the rules. He failed to understand that the world had changed. The rules were all that mattered now, and I was the one who enforced them. I buzzed Maria. "Please schedule a meeting for Mr. and Mrs. Harrison for 10 a.m. tomorrow. And Maria, do not mention my name. Just confirm it's with the branch manager." The next morning at precisely 10 a.m., Maria buzzed my office. "Mr. Campbell, your 10 o'clock is here." "Send them in," I said, straightening the file on my desk so it was perfectly aligned with the edge. The door opened. Robert and Eleanor Harrison walked in, their faces arranged in expressions of confident expectation. Robert was already reaching out a hand, a practiced political smile on his face, ready to greet the man he thought would be sitting here. And then they saw me. Time seemed to slow down. Robert's hand froze in midair. The smile on his face didn't just vanish, it collapsed as if the muscles holding it up had been severed. Eleanor let out a tiny audible gasp, her hand flying to her pearl necklace, the very same one she'd worn 3 years ago. Their eyes widened in pure, unadulterated shock. They looked at me, then at the nameplate on my desk that read Weston Campbell, branch manager, then back at me. The color drained from their faces. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply stood up, maintaining perfect professional composure. "Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Harrison, please have a seat." They moved like automatons, their earlier confidence completely shattered, and sank into the chairs opposite my desk. For a full 30 seconds, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the bank's air conditioning. I sat down and opened their file. Thank you for coming in. I've completed the final review of your application for a small business consolidation loan in the amount of $250,000. Eleanor found her voice first a weak, stammering whisper. Weston, we had no idea. I'm Mr. Campbell. I corrected her gently but firmly, my eyes fixed on the documents in front of me. Now, as I was saying, I've reviewed your financial statements. Let's turn to page 3, your cash flow analysis for the last 36 months. I walked them through their own financial ruin, point by painful point. I used the bank's official terminology, citing specific lending criteria and risk assessment protocols. I pointed to their declining revenue streams, their unsustainable debt load, their lack of viable collateral. I was calm, methodical, and utterly impersonal. I spoke to them not as the boy whose heart they'd broken, but as a financial professional assessing a failing business. Robert, recovering from his initial shock, tried to change the narrative. Weston, listen, he started, attempting a familiar tone. Clara, she talks about you sometimes. We made a mistake. I held up a hand, stopping him cold. Mr. Harrison, my personal history has no bearing on this meeting. We are here to discuss the financial facts of this application. According to Section C, subsection 4 of our lending guidelines, an applicant's debt-to-income ratio cannot exceed a certain threshold. Yours, I'm afraid, is significantly higher. I continued my methodical dissection, refusing to let them make it personal. Every time they tried to steer the conversation back to the past, I politely but relentlessly steered it back to the numbers. They were trapped. They had come here expecting to use their social standing and personal connections. But the man across the desk from them refused to acknowledge that world even existed. He only acknowledged the cold, hard data they themselves had provided. After 15 minutes, I closed the folder. I looked up and met their desperate eyes for the first time. Based on the information provided, I said, my voice clear and steady, and pursuant to Northwood Financial's risk management policies, your business presents an unacceptably high risk of default. I'm sorry, but the bank cannot extend this line of credit. The loan application is denied. The words hung in the air, final and absolute. For a moment, there was only stunned silence. Then Robert's face contorted, turning a blotchy, furious red. He slammed his hand on my desk. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He snarled. This is revenge. You got this job and you waited just for this moment, didn't you? To get back at us for Clara. I remained perfectly still, my hands resting on the closed file. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. On the contrary, Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. My decision isn't personal at all. It's based purely on the principles of financial viability. It's an assessment of a high-risk investment with limited potential for returns. These are the very same principles you and your wife impressed upon me so clearly 3 years ago. I simply learned the lesson you taught me. The color drained from his face again, replaced by the pale white of utter defeat. He had no answer. I had used his own logic, his own heartless words as the foundation for my decision. It was irrefutable. He just sat there sputtering while Eleanor began to sob quietly. His anger, having no logical place to land, just boiled over into a pathetic, incoherent tirade. He called me names. He made threats. I just sat there and listened, my expression unchanging. When he was finished, I pressed a button on my desk phone. Maria, could you please send security to my office? Within a minute, 2 uniformed guards appeared at the door. Robert and Eleanor stared at them in horror. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison's meeting is concluded, I said to the guards. Please escort them out. As they were led away, Robert turned back one last time, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. But it was the look of a man who had already lost. He had no power here. This was my office, my turf, and my rules. When the door clicked shut, the silence that filled the room was profound. I sat there for a long time, just looking at the closed blue folder on my desk. I didn't feel the triumphant glee I might have expected. There was no surge of vengeful joy. Instead, there was just a quiet, deep sense of closure. The victory wasn't in their failure. It was in my success. I hadn't set out to ruin them. I had set out to build myself. I got this position not through scheming, but through merit. Through 2 years of grueling work in the fast-track management program. I had proven them wrong, not by tearing them down, but by building myself up into something they could have never imagined. I had become the stable, secure, financially viable man they said I could never be. And in the end, I hadn't stooped to their level. I made the correct, ethical, professional decision. A decision any good bank manager would have made. I had proven that I was better than them, Not by being cruel, but by being fair. Slowly, I stood up and walked the Harrison's file over to the cabinet. I slipped it into the slot for closed cases. It was just another piece of paperwork now, another transaction in a long day of transactions. I returned to my desk where the next client's file was waiting. I picked it up, opened it, and began to read. The past was no longer a ghost haunting me. It was just a file in a drawer. It held no more power over me. I had finally and completely moved on.